Welcome to this evening's Read UMass presentation of the What is Life Worth Q&A with Kenneth Feinberg, moderated by Dean Barbara Krauthammer. This event will be recorded and available for viewing at a later date. By joining this session, you are giving consent to be a part of a recorded event. Please note that participants' cameras, microphones, and chat will be disabled throughout the event. Participants are encouraged to submit questions to the Q&A box, and the presenter may address if time and topic allow during the presentation. Thank you for joining us, and now it's my pleasure to turn the event over to our moderator, Dean Krauthammer.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome. I'm so pleased you all could join us for this book conversation with Ken Feinberg. I want to begin by giving just a quick biographical introduction of Ken, who really needs no introduction, but that's what you get, Ken, an introduction. And then we'll start with a conversation and some questions about the book, What is Life Worth? And maybe a little bit about the Netflix film Worth as well. But I'm really delighted to have this chance to talk with Ken Feinberg tonight. I got to apologize. I have to read down. I'm wearing the wrong glasses for reading off the screen this evening. Mr. Feinberg completed a bachelor's in history at UMass Amherst and went on to a distinguished career in law and public service. Ken is one of the nation's leading experts in alternative dispute resolution, having served as special master of the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund, the Department of Justice Victims of State-Sponsored Terrorism Fund, the Department of the Treasury's TARP Executive Compensation Program, and the Treasury's Private Multi-Employer Pension Reform Program. He was also the Special Settlement Master of the Agent Orange Victims Compensation Program. In 2010, Mr. Feinberg was appointed by the Obama administration to oversee compensation of the victims of the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. More recently, he served as the administrator of the New York State Diocese Independent Reconciliation and Compensation Funds, the One Orlando Fund, the GM Ignition Switch Compensation Program, and One Fund Boston Compensation Program, which arose from the Boston Marathon bombings. More recently, he serves as the court-appointed settlement master in the Fiat Chrysler diesel emissions class action litigation in San Francisco. Ken Feinberg has been appointed mediator and arbitrator in thousands of complex disputes over the past 35 years. Closer to home in Amherst, I'm really pleased to say that he has been a dedicated and generous alumnus and really a cherished member of our extended community in the history department and in the College of Humanities and Fine Arts. And of course, we're here tonight, as you all know, because Ken is the author of a couple of books, but we're here tonight to talk about What is Life Worth, in which he details his experiences as the special master of the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund. And of course, the book was also the basis for the Netflix film Worth. So welcome, Ken, and thank you for being here tonight.
I'm honored to be here. I'm an alum, and I'm excited about being back with the UMass family, even for an hour.
Even for an hour and even on Zoom, it's pretty good. So let's just jump right in because we only have an hour and I feel like you and I could probably talk for 2 hours. But let me start with a question that I suspect most of our alumni readers and participants in the book read are curious about, which is what prompted you to write the book? What did you want readers to get out of the book? Either to learn or to just think about and sit with? What did you hope to accomplish?
First, it was cathartic. After spending 33 months as the administrator of the fund and having dealt with so many challenges, it was an opportunity for me to put on the printed page basically what I went through and to let steam out of the pressure cooker by formalizing in the written word, hey, everybody, this is what it was like. and it helped me cope. The second reason I wrote the book is because there's never been and never will be, I believe, a fund quite like 9/11. As a UMass history student, I thought it important for the country and for future generations for there to be a book describing this unique, unprecedented compensation program. And I thought that as long as it was unlikely to be replicated, why don't we preserve somewhere a primary source historically describing the uniqueness and how it worked, this compensation program?
Well, the historian professor in me really appreciates that commitment to documenting both your experiences and the larger context, the larger history. And so you've said two things that I want to follow up on, and I know that came in from a number of our readers as well. And so I'm going to start with the second point you made, which is about the distinctiveness of this fund, right? Being a congressionally appropriated, publicly funded compensation program, which I believe makes it unique from virtually all of the other ones that you've worked with, right?
Yes.
And of course, the question comes up, and you address the question in the book of why 9/11 and why not Oklahoma? Why not the first World Trade Center bombing? Why not other, acts of, let's say, natural disasters, right? Why not the tornadoes the horrific scenes, right, that we've just witnessed? Why not Katrina? And so I wonder if you could maybe, delve into that a little bit more about why not, right? Why do you think that 9/11 required this kind of compensation program that might not be appropriate in other situations?
Well, as you just pointed out, bad things happen to good people every day in this country. There's no 9/11 fund, public taxpayer money. It's a rather unique aberration from the normal rule. We're a very self-reliant people. You want to protect yourself, buy life insurance. I mean, that's basically the way it works in the United States. 9/11 was different. 9/11, historically, I think, ranks probably with the American Civil War, Pearl Harbor, and the assassination of President Kennedy as a unique historical horror. And the simple answer is that after 9/11, the American people decided 9/11 is different. It's different. And with the important help of the airlines industry that was worried about economic disaster because of the attacks and the fact that nobody would fly a plane if there was litigation over who caused 9/11, etc. Congress intervened. And there was no, it was apolitical. There were no blue states, red states, Republican, Democrat. Everybody intervened, created this fund. And it was the nature of the disaster, its place in American history, and the support, the political support from the American people, I must say. We'll show the world how we take care of our own. And that's what led to the fund. And it worked. The program worked.
So let me ask you a slightly provocative question, if I may, that I have not heard you talk about in other conversations about the book and about this history. Do you think that part of what galvanized public and political unity, right, support and unity around 9/11, and that gave rise to this unique fund, was that it was foreign terrorism, right? It was an attack by foreign terrorists, as opposed to so-called domestic terrorists, right?
Oh, I think so. I think so.
And that it really was a sense of.
Oh, I think that was a very important part. The headlines, foreign attack on our own shores, even Pearl Harbor. That was in Hawaii, and there were soldiers and naval personnel, etc. This was civilians, innocent victims. yes, I think the foreign element played a significant, not a complete, but a significant role. Yes.
Interesting. One of the things that a lot of people ask about, and I think that everybody has struggled with, I think one of the great gifts your book gives us is thinking about what is the value of a human life, right? And how do you assess that value? And one of the things that struck me when I was rereading the book in anticipation of tonight was how intertwined, and I guess it's what makes us human, right, is how intertwined our sense of morality is with an idea of value. All of those abstract, what you might call qualities or character traits that we assign a non-monetary value to. And then there are the actuarial tables that assign a monetary value. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit, you mentioned earlier that part of the impetus for writing the book was sort of your own cathartic need to release all those months of being with this problem. So I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more about how you approached these intertwined notions of value in human life.
That's a great question, of course. A question better directed at priests and rabbis, you see. Because when you talk about, notice the title of the book. The title of the book is not what is a life worth. It is what is life worth. It is a 30,000-foot discussion of the variables that go into any valuation of a human life, not a particular life. It's not an algorithm, it's a blueprint. Now, I've said this often. Calculating the value of a life in the American legal system is not rocket science. It's done every day in every court in Amherst, the Commonwealth, every state, and every federal court. It is not rocket science. It's simple, the formula. It's simple. What would the victim have earned over a work life but for the tragedy? Well, economic loss. Economic loss. Now that's that's not even an actuarial table, that's a calculator. My wife was earning $60,000 a year and was 38 years old when she died in the World Trade Center. If she was at the World Trade Center and 38 at 60,000, she would have retired. We have the statistics at 65, and she would have earned this after taxes, economic loss. Add to that pain and suffering, emotional distress visited on the family. Well, the family, was it a wife with was it a husband with no children? 2 children, 8 children. Add it up. There is a number. Now notice, in the American legal system, let's not talk about integrity, loyalty, courage, humanity, sensitivity, religiosity. No bearing, you see, in the legal system. It is a rather cold math calculation. But you see, that's why when you go to court, the banker who gets killed crossing the street by an automobile will receive a lot more from the jury than the waiter, the busboy, the soldier, the fireman, the cop. Their economic loss was less, the bankers was more, and there it is. So in my book, I try and explain, when you calculate the value of lives, I'm not a rabbi and I'm not a priest. And if you want to know about the moral value of a human being, go to a confessional or a meeting at Hillel or with a rabbi. You're not going to get that from the legal system. what you're going to get from the legal system is an objective, rather cold calculation without the benefit of the other attributes of a human life on earth.
So I think it was, thank you. You know, in preparation for this, I was reading up on tort law a little bit earlier today. Thinking about this, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, you know, in the movie, I think it's right. It's the character, it's Michael Keaton playing you, who says, right, there's no such thing as fair. I don't think that's actually a line out of the book, though it's certainly a point in the book, right? But he says, right, there's no such thing as fair. But so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your experience, what it was like trying to have this precise conversation, right? About, right, we're looking at economic value, and with the pressure of the deadline, what was that experience like of interacting with the families and also with your team, right? You're working with a team of hundreds, I mean, right, between Price Waterhouse and your own group and your partner, Camille. How did you, I don't know, how did you balance all of that, sort of dealing with the human side and then if you'll excuse me, the business side of managing this?
Very debilitating. Very debilitating.
Yeah.
You try telling a wife or a husband or a mother or father who within the previous few months lost a loved one through absolutely no fault of anybody except the terrorists, or the argument, at least not their fault. There is no way that we found you could ever explain to a grieving survivor, well, here's how the legal system works. Forget it. Forget it. What we learned, and I think the book talks about this a little bit, the movie spends a great deal of time on this. What we learned is the calculation of a life is not rocket science. What's very, very difficult is the emotion. Trying to explain in private to a grieving survivor how we come up with dollars and cents. And what we found, and this was the saving grace of the program, what survivors who file claims want more than anything is not an explanation of economic loss and tort law. They want to be heard in private. They want the opportunity to come and see me, one of two purposes: either to vent about life's unfairness. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my daughter, 21 years old, an angel. Don't tell me there's a God. No God would allow my angel to die in the World Trade Center. Or they came to see me privately to validate the memory of a lost loved one. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my wife. We were married for 25 years. And I want to take time now to show you a video of our wedding 25 years ago. Mr. Jones, you don't have to do that. It'll be very emotional and it won't have any bearing on compensation. You're going to watch. I want you to see what those murderers did to my wife. Show the video. So I think that in answer to your question, trying to explain the vagaries of tort law, forget it. There's no real interest in that. And that's unfortunate in the sense that people are very emotional and they get upset about things like that. But what saved the program was the confessional, the opportunity for me to sit silently and listen to their justification of the value of a life. That was important.
I was struck, thank you. I was struck in the book. There's just a brief mention somewhere towards the end where you talk about sort of all of the mementos, right? The objects, the things that people brought to show you, right? And just sort of and I can only imagine, right, how overwhelming that must have been as people are going through their
My room was filled with memorabilia,
yeah.
teddy bears, photograph albums, medals, certificates of good service, diplomas from schools filled up my room.
Yeah, well, and it's funny, right? I mean, and I mean, I've still really been struggling with this, right? How do we value human life? And I think there's something really poignant in the way that you write about it and the way you talk about, right? That it's about people wanting to be heard, right? And have that memory, right? Have their love for the person preserved and acknowledged in some way. And so I think, I suspect, judging from the comments of the readers, that's definitely something that many people took away from the experience of reading your book. So, one of the things that I think struck people as well and that I thought you handled so beautifully in the book was talking about the different groups of people, if we can think about it this way, right? So you have a section in the book, and the movie touches on this as well, where you talk about the families of the undocumented workers who lost their lives, and the work that you did to connect with those families, and then all traveling to England, right? You talk about that, and then the book includes at the end the appendix that lists all of the countries, right, whose citizens were victims. And so one question came up from the reader, which was just, how did you, again, sort of on the logistics side, how did you handle communicating with people in different countries? That seems like a whole other set of challenges, right? Of assuring them, as you write in the book, yes, the United States government wants to give you this money.
Oh, that's right. You had to convince undocumented widows who lost husbands and fathers at the World Trade Center working in windows of the world without appropriate green cards. You had to convince people, this isn't a joke. This isn't a trap. You're not gonna fill out a form and get deported.
Right.
And I must say, to the credit of the Bush administration, particularly John Ashcroft, the Attorney General of the United States, we translated into foreign languages that this is no trap, it's a legitimate program. We went up to the Bronx and met with undocumented widows and explained to them in Spanish how this worked. They were worried that they'd be jailed, that their kids would be taken away from them, that they'd be deported. No. And we finally convinced a couple of them to file and get paid. And once that happened, you open the floodgates. Once the 13 widows see that 2 of them got paid and they're still here, then everybody filed. Same with the foreigners. We went to London and met with 32 survivors from different countries, examples. And we explained that this is how the program works. And the questions, you're working for the CIA, aren't you? Do we have to come to the United States to get the money? Nope, we'll transfer it. Are we getting the money in American dollars or foreign currency? American dollars. And eventually, virtually, all of these individuals from 65 countries were compensated. See, the fascinating aspect of this law passed by Congress didn't distinguish between American citizens and non-American citizens, didn't say that non-Americans should get less, didn't say that you had to come to the United States to get paid. It was an extremely generous outpouring from the American people. I'm not sure Congress even thought about it, to tell you the truth, in the rush to get the program up and running. Had they thought about it a bit longer, they may have been a little bit more xenophobic.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, everybody got paid.
That is fascinating. Another question that people wanted to know was, was there one interaction with a family that was either in the US or abroad that was especially memorable to you in some
Oh
way?
my goodness. Talk about 2 hours. We could spend 2 days talking about individual claimants where to this day I still get chills and wake up in the middle of the night. Example, just one example. A lady comes to see me, 26 years old, sobbing. I thought she was going to collapse in my office. Mr. Feinberg, my husband died at the World Trade Center. He was a fireman. And he left me with our 2 children, 6 and 4. Now, according to your program, I'm going to get $2.2 million tax-free. I want that money in 30 days. I said to her, Mrs. Jones, I mean, you're going to get the money, but it's US Treasury, it's taxpayer money. The Treasury Department, I mean, it may take 60 days or 90 days, but you'll get paid very quickly. No, 30 days. I said to her, I said, why do you need this money in 30 days? Why? I'll tell you why, Mr. Feinberg. I have terminal cancer. I have 10 weeks to live. My husband was going to survive me and take care of our 2 little ones. Now they're going to be orphans. I have got to get that money. I've got to set up a trust. I've got to find a guardian. I've got to get an appropriate bank to hold the money. I don't have a lot of time. And I'm going to lose my faculties pretty soon. And you got to help me. Well, we ran down to the Treasury. We walked the application right through the bureaucracy. We got her the money. 8 weeks later, she died. Oh. Now, I could tell you 100 stories like that. 100. It is absolutely the most chilling, debilitating part of the job with the stories you heard about life's unfairness.
Sure.
And you don't get over that.
What's striking to me, I know I'm trying not to get choked up here, just hearing this. I mean, I was choked up reading it, but what's striking to me about this story in particular and other ones like it is how in the midst of all of this, right, sort of navigating the math, as you said, and at the outset, that you and your team and Camille maintained throughout and obviously recognized you had to, but that you were able to maintain that human connection up to and including doing things like walking the application through the process to make, the level of care for the individual is
with great difficulty.
Stunning.
With great difficulty. A lot of tears by professionals, including me, in private, never in front of the victims, in private. A lot of diversion. I mean, let's take a break and walk go outside a sunny day and walk to a playground and see little ones playing and laughing. In the evening, as the book points out, and the movie, a great deal of music, opera, classical music, the height of civilization. During the day, you're dealing with the bottom, the cellar of civilization. At night, Mozart and Bach and Beethoven. So, I mean, you had to try and separate what you're doing during the day and try and get some psychic relief.
Sure, no, I can't imagine. One of the things folks wanted to know, and I want to pause and say that if our listeners have questions for Mr. Feinberg, I invite you to put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we can take those as we go along. One of the things a couple of people wanted to know is, did this experience change your approach to the work I mean, it clearly had an effect on you. I mean, I think that goes without say. But did it change how you approach your work in this area of compensation and serving as the special master of these various funds?
Oh, yes. First of all, substantively, you become much more fatalistic. I mean, I don't think I any longer plan more than 2 or 3 weeks ahead. Life has a way of throwing curveballs at everybody, I also, in terms of my work, I became quite an advocate for the notion, when possible, all deaths are equal. Everyone who's the victim of an innocent victim of tragedy should get the same. All that lives should be valued the same. Now, that's a very, very provocative issue, you see. That is not the American legal system when the banker gets more than the waiter or the busboy. But I found in all of the other programs, or not all, but most of the other programs you referenced at the beginning, like One Fund Boston, the Boston Marathon. Well, that money, unlike 9/11, that money was a gift. It was a gift. You could take that money as a victim, an eligible claimant, and you didn't have to promise that you wouldn't sue or you wouldn't go into the tort system. It was a gift. Well, the minute it's a gift and it's found money, the 4 people who died in the marathon bombing, including the 8-year-old, the 45-year-old, you all get the same. Don't look at your friend or your neighbor. You're all getting the same. And in terms of physical injury, just all I want to know is how long were you in the hospital? Hospitalization is a pretty good surrogate for seriousness of injury. And my work, I much more value efficient, simple, more equitable programs that don't make distinctions of economic loss. Now, that's very provocative. That is a minority view. But you've asked the question, and I think the system would work better if similar lives were treated similarly for similar injuries without regard to your estate or your income or your wherewithal. But that's how I urge I think if the 9/11 fund were ever done again, I would urge Congress, please, everybody gets the same. It's a gift.
Oh, well, thank you. So you've anticipated another question, which was, what if this were done again? How would you do it? And so we have a question from Donald Rizzo, who asks, did you have many fraudulent claims, people trying to work the system, and how did you handle them?
Very few. There's a couple of reasons why. There's a technical legal reason or a factual reason, and then there's a philosophical reason. There were very few cases of fraud because you're going to have to be very creative to be able to prove, to try and commit fraud. Look, it's a traumatic 9/11 disaster. We know who was on the planes. We've got the manifests of the planes. If you were in the World Trade Center and you file a claim, you have to have a police certificate of death caused by 9/11. If you were at the Pentagon, we have the military records. So to come up with a fraudulent creative claim, I think in the entire program of 7,300 applications, I think the number of fraudulent claims were less than 5.
Wow.
And we just sent them to the Justice Department, and the Justice Department decided whether they were fraudulent and prosecutable or whether they were just people trying to game the system, but they're not. I mean, they're just seeing how far we'd go in finding eligibility. Fraud wasn't. Fraud, that's the technical legal reason. Philosophically, I think there was, unlike today in the United States, just 20 years ago, a sense of patriotism. What are we doing trying to defraud the taxpayer when Feinberg's trying to pay people who lost loved ones? I mean, how low will we go in trying to defraud the USA? there were no, villains in this program, in the program. I'm not saying the cause of 9/11 and all that, but I think the country was swept up by a patriotic sense of obligation to the victims. And I doubt you'd see that today in America, but back just 20 years ago, I think you saw it.
Interesting. I agree with you. So we have about 20 minutes left or so, 15, 20 minutes, and there are two areas that we haven't covered yet. So one is a little bit more focused on the bridge between the book and the movie. And, I know that you've had really positive things to say about the movie, but I wonder honestly what it was like for you, because the movie is an adaptation, right? It's not a documentary. It's an adaptation. And so I wonder what it was like for you watching a version of your story that had some elements that were fictionalized to greater or lesser degree.
It's a great question. First of all, I never thought in my wildest dreams that the book would ever be made into a movie. Don't forget, the original book, it's been republished now with a new epilogue and a new prologue, but when that book was published in 2005, I believe, it sat until 2008 as a book that you could buy hardback and then paperback. In 2008, a producer, an independent movie producer, came to see me and said, "This is going to be a great movie." I laughed. I scoffed. You're never going to be able to make a movie that captures the essence of what we went through. Yes, we are. And I want to give you a check here for simply an exclusive right for 2 years to make the movie. Well, from 2008 to 2010, an exclusive right, re-up 2010 to 12, 2012 to 12. I'm laughing, I'm taking this money, and there's no movie, and it's now 10 years since the original exclusive arrangement. And then in 2018, out of the clear blue, I get a very substantial check as a down payment, and I dust off the old contract. You will get a substantial payment when we now have a script and a cast. You'll get 50%. And when we roll the camera and start filming the movie, you get another 50%. And then I found out they're going to do it. I looked at the script, made some suggestions, and looked at the cast: Keaton, Amy Ryan playing Camille Byros, Stanley Tucci. I said, I can't believe that they're going to ever pull this off. And when I saw the film, in response to your question, I think that although there was a great deal of dramatic license taken in the film that is not accurate, overall, capturing sort of the essence of what we went through, they did it. They pulled it off. And especially for younger people who weren't around and don't remember 2001, the opportunity to learn about what we went through and what America went through and how it worked and why it really, I think, was largely a success, or so say the critics and the public that saw the film.
No, I think so. And I think part of what was appealing to me, and I wonder if others, and again, folks who are listening, you are invited and welcome to submit your questions. One of the things that was appealing to me, and with all due respect and admiration, is that the film portrayed you the way you portray yourself, which is you were doing this work and you were doing good. I think like one of the things that makes the film so appealing now is that it's just, in some ways it's a story of tragedy and loss, but it's also a story of the capacity of people to do good in the face of horror, right? And I think one of the things that's so striking for me about both the book and the movie and talking to you is that you are, forgive me for saying, you're just a man, Ken, right? Like you are a human being with the rest of us, in the muck with the rest of us, and figuring out how to do good. And that to me was what was so compelling about the film, right? That the Michael Keaton character playing you is just a man trying to do the best he can in that situation.
Well, that's what you said. Now, if you ask my children about Michael Keaton, my children will say, Dad, it's a good movie, really good. And Michael Keaton captured your mannerisms and your dialect from New England pretty well. But if you see Michael Keaton, tell him that he ought to stick with Batman or Beetlejuice, because he didn't really. And I said to my kids, that's not fair. I mean, Michael, no, and they were sort of half joking about it. But we wanted to convey what we went through. And I think the number one message of that film, I think we talked about this offline. To me, the number one lesson of that film is that people in the United States today, this program was only 20 years ago. It's not like the Civil War. People ought to see today how America, as one community, apolitical, rallied around those people, those victims.
Yeah.
I don't think there's one chance in 100 you could get a program like this today up and running from Congress. And I want UMass students and the rest of the country. You know, there was a time just 20 years ago when America was one community and had one goal, to rally around these victims, because there but for fortune could be any of us. And that's really the message I want that film to convey. And I think it does do that.
I think it does. And I think this is a good reason for me to remind you that we've had conversations about you teaching a course for us next year. So, because I do think, our young people, our students, need to have these conversations about the past, about the present, and about what's possible for the future.
And let me just say, I taught a course 2 years ago at UMass, as you know, on the history of compensation programs in the United States. And first of all, the UMass history department, my alma mater, unbelievably supportive of this class. And we had the best and the brightest in the class, a seminar. And we went through the 9/11 fund, but we looked at other compensation programs that weren't public taxpayer money or were very limited to the War of 1812. And there were some other examples that were different from 9/11, but it was fabulous. And yes, I do hope, fingers crossed, that I'll be back. I'm invited.
Yeah.
So, and now, of course, thanks to you and others, we have that new special classroom,
right,
with state-of-the-art video and audio, and that class, I think, is the perfect place to do this.
And you were ahead of your time. Before any of us was talking about Zoom and teaching on Zoom, Ken Feinberg came along and said, I want to set up a classroom that would allow this kind of video, live, real-time teaching. Before we end, and I see, Steve Anderson has posted a comment, and I will, about the tort system and jury determination of value. And I'll just read his last sentence here, right, where he says, right, the better the plaintiff's attorney, the greater the recovery that can be achieved through the court system, more chance, less justice. So I think in response to some of what you were talking about how to calculate the valuation. But what I wanted to ask you, if we can come back full circle, my first question was, why did you write the book? What prompted you? And I think maybe what we could leave tonight with is a brief reflection from you on how you wrote the book. You've talked about sort of the emotional toll the experience took on you, and the need for catharsis. So what was the writing process for? Like, how did you assemble the information, decide how to organize it?
It's a very interesting question. I've received, not from the general public that wants to know about the book and what we've talked about, but there have been a few podcasts and a few English composition classes too, where I've been asked not the substance, but how did you go about the disciplines of actually putting pen to paper?
Yeah.
And it is sort of, I learned as a first-time author. First, I used my history skills to gather together the material. That is, as you know, and as you've cited, the stories. I reached out to the families, asked their permission to use what happened to them and what they went through, promising to redact and not name names and make enough changes so they couldn't be identified. And I asked about 50 families, and 35 or so gave me permission. 15 said, don't you dare, we're not giving you permission and you can't do it. So I had to gather the material together. I went through thousands of applications to the fund, claim forms, and kept a diary during my administration of the fund, figuring that there may come a day when I'd want to do something like that. So I gathered the resources together. Then what I did for about 3 months, every Saturday and Sunday, when I wasn't working, I would go into the office with one secretary, Joyce DeBoss, and I would stand and circle with a stand-up desk. And for 3 months, I simply outlined each chapter. No substantive composition, just bullets. And that took time, but it was worthwhile. Now I had sort of a blueprint. And then for another 8 months, every Saturday and Sunday, oral dictation, transcribed immediately by Miss DeBoss. She wrote the whole book, or transcribed it, draft 1. And then at the end of the 8 months, I had a draft book, sent it to my publisher and my agent. They made comments, they helped. And the whole thing took about a year, 14 months. Everybody has a different way of doing it, but that's the way I did it. And the most important thing I learned is if you're going to write a book, you know this, discipline. You can't say, I'm going to write a book, but I'll think about it next month and I'll write 1 chapter and then wait 4 months or 3. I just was determined to get it down, and that's how I did it.
I wish every student and graduate student that I've ever advised could hear you say this. I always say things like, don't think you're going to get it all done over spring break, right? Write an entire thesis over spring vacation. You need to, exactly. And I recently told a group of students, think about writing 1 page a day for an entire calendar year. You would wind up, and I said, even if you took the weekends off, you'd still wind up with a full thesis if you wrote 5 days a week. So this is, I think, is very helpful for understanding, your process of, making sense of the material, making sense of your experience, and, presenting it in a way that readers with, no background in tort law, no, either living memories of 9/11 or distant memories of it, could really access the book. One of the things at the end, Ken, and this is where my mind goes a lot, and we've talked about this before, at the very end of the new version, right? You mentioned the issue of debates about reparations for slavery. And the logistical challenges that would pose. And I think that's another area where the tangle of historical and moral and legal and then just logistical issues can seem overwhelming to people who are trying to understand the arguments in favor of reparations, or just sort of and so I wonder if you might, share some of your thoughts about how you've approached that question?
I'm asked occasionally about reparations for slavery, and slavery, as a historian, I can say that slavery is so ingrained in the fabric and history of the country. I mean, it is part of the foundation of the company, not only slavery, but Jim Crow and racial animus today in America. When it comes to reparations, I say, well, first of all, what does that mean? Let's have a seminar on reparations. What does it mean? If you mean like the 9/11 fund, we ought to send a check, pay to the order of, to all eligible victims of slavery. Well, go ahead. I want to see what that program is going to look like. I have no idea how you'd fashion a program that would single out a finite number of victims and leave everybody else ineligible. Example. Well, I read some academic who writes and says, everybody who can demonstrate a link to a relative who was a slave should get paid. Yeah? And what if you can't demonstrate that link? What if either I don't have the proof, or, well, I know that I have a link, but it's not to slavery, it's to Jim Crow. My great-grandfather was lynched. You mean I'm not eligible? I mean, I'm trying to determine logistically, because I think the goal is perfectly admirable. Who's eligible? What proof do you require? Who's paying for this? The American taxpayer? How much is this going to cost? So, I mean, I think that my own view is if reparations means prospective programs in housing, education, healthcare, affirmative action, something that now today is frowned on by many policymakers, which I think is perfectly legit. You got to define your terms, and it sounds like a great UMass seminar, I must say. Got to think
Spoken
about
like a true historian. Define your terms. Spoken like a true historian. So Ken, before we want to wrap up, I want to just invite you, if there are any thoughts that you'd like to share with the readers, our alumni readers, who have been remarkably quiet on the Q&A page, I have to say. There were a lot of questions in the book group discussion chat that they had earlier in previous weeks. And I think we've covered most of them. But if you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with your readers and fellow alumni.
Well, I just want to say two things, both very parochial. Much of my work over the last 40 years, there is a direct link to my history degree at UMass. I say it all the time, not only to the dean and to Swami, but I say it to the public generally. The historical methodology and discipline that I learned at UMass is a major reason for what I've done over the last 40 years, mostly with success. And the other thing I must say, we talked a little bit about the class. I've taught classes around the country and you know, special appearances and seminars. The history department and the School of Liberal Arts, they gave me on a platter when I came to teach 25 students from the Commonwealth program, from the history department, from sociology department, various, they hand selected these guys, these students. I have never had a more qualified quality class than these 25. I mean, I've kept in touch with some of them. This was a most incredible group. And if I'm able to come back and teach, I'm going to call in all of you, the dean and the various, Brian Ogilvy at the, you just gave us the best students. And Miss Wilson was important in getting that group, was fabulous. So that's my sort of, my gratitude to my alma mater. I think UMass is fabulous place. I think its reputation is enhanced every day. And it was an honor for me to be part of this book club.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, it's really been an honor and a pleasure for me to have this chance to talk with you. We didn't get to talk about opera, so maybe next time, or maybe we'll meet up in New York and go see some live performances now that we can get back in the theater. But I just want to remind everybody, this recording will be made available. I am not sure when, but I would encourage everyone to check the Alumni Association website and check your email for more information. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to read the book, taking the time to participate in the previous group chats that you had and submitting your questions, and for spending an hour with us tonight. It was really, I have to say, this was a lovely way for me to end my workday. And Ken, I hope it was a nice way for you to decompress at the end of the day as well.
An honor and a privilege. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.